Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another edition of Klima History. This is part 3, finally part 3 of the 13 British colonies. So kick back, grab some popcorn, and join us on another fun-filled adventure with Klima History. Alright, like we said, our focus today is the southern colonies, which consist of Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Georgia? I got Georgia on my mind. No, I can't sing, sorry. The major city in the southern colonies is in Virginia at this time, and it's called Jamestown. Of course, that's named after the King of England at the time, King James. It was founded in 1607 for trade and profit. Now, one of the big things you have to know about this is the first successful British colony in North America. There were other colonies before it, but they were very unsuccessful. They didn't make it. We talked a little bit about Roanoke. If you ever heard of Roanoke, that colony did not make it. Sir Walter Raleigh leaves for 3 years. He comes back and his whole colony's gone. We don't know what happened. That's why it's called the Lost Colony of Roanoke. Now, Jamestown will be the capital of Virginia till the late 1600s when it's going to move to Williamsburg. And today, Williamsburg is still what we call a colonial city. If you ever go there to Williamsburg, they'll have a lot of people who are actors who will pretend to be colonials there. And some of the buildings are still there from colonial Williamsburg. Anyhow, so if you see in this picture, this is a depiction of what Jamestown would have looked like. It looks like a triangle. There's still an archaeological dig at Jamestown, and they're finding that it actually did look like this. And on the corners are platforms where they put cannons to protect themselves from the natives. Now, there's conflicting stories about Jamestown and the founding of Jamestown because a lot of people associate that with Pocahontas and John Smith. You know, the Disney story where Pocahontas and John Smith, oh, they love each other so much. And, you know, no, none of that was really true. Again, there's conflicting stories of what really happened. The consensus is really that Pocahontas, aka Matoka, was captured by the Jamestown settlers, and John Smith was captured by the Powhatan Indians, and there was kind of an exchange between them. And because of these events, it created a peace between the Jamestown settlers and the Powhatan Indians. We don't really know what happened, but we do know that Pocahontas ended up marrying a man named John Rolfe, who's one of the leaders at Jamestown. And she becomes very English. She practices English customs. She changes her name to Rebecca. She actually goes to England and becomes English herself. So that showed a lot of the alliance that the Jamestown settlers and the Powhatan Indians had, because someone was willing to actually become English and practice that culture as well. So that's what helped Jamestown survive during this time. Again, we don't know what really happened. Do your research. Yes, do your research. So let's talk about the characteristics of the southern colonies. Now, the southern colonies are very, 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 I don't know, but very, very hot. The climate of the southern colonies is very much like the climate here in Texas. It's hot. We got long summers. But the only real difference is they get a little more rain on the East Coast. And because of that, you're able to grow more crops. And the soil is a little bit better. They have this rich, black, fertile soil in the southern colonies at this time. Now, because of that, they have a plantation economy. They grow cash crops such as rice, tobacco, indigo. Now, this is important because a plantation is different than just having a farm. A plantation is very, very large, and they're growing crops that they can make a lot of profit from, and they're actually using slave labor. If it's not for that, we would just call it a farm. So slave labor is going to be extremely important at this time because they need a large quantities of land to grow these crops to make lots of money. And you couldn't keep growing the crops such as tobacco on the same piece of land over and over and over, because all of the nutrients of the soil would just basically be gone. So you had to get more and more and more land to grow tobacco, which required more and more slaves. They also grew indigo, and one of the big things with indigo is it's the first plant at this time. There's other plants as well, but indigo is easily grown in the southern colonies, and it's used to dye clothes. It's an actual plant. You mush it up, and you put other chemicals in it actually, and it creates dye. Now in the 1800s, which is cool, something that I learned just recently, is that Levi Strauss, you probably heard of him, Levi Jeans, used indigo because it's so plentiful in the South to dye jeans in the 1800s. And jeans, these stonewashed jeans, were used for at first by miners, gold miners, and then eventually coal miners, because they were so tough and durable. And today we know that jeans are, very popular. They've been popular since the 1800s. What about government? Again, the government in the southern colonies were royal colonies. The king appointed a governor he would send over, just like many of the other colonies. What was unique about the southern colonies, though, specifically in Virginia, is that they created an actual House of Representatives. They call it the Virginia House of Burgesses. And the reason why they did this because Virginia was so big and there were people scattered all over the place. So they wanted a central location to meet and decide what the rules or laws were of the colony of Virginia. So they met in Jamestown early on, and later on it's going to be Williamsburg. And because of that, they also met because they were so far away from England. They're 3,000 miles away. I mean, they're not going to sit around waiting for the king to tell them what to do. That's kind of dumb. So they're going to create their own government, and they're going to elect representatives from each part of the colony to meet, 1 or 2 months out of the year to decide what their rules are going to be. So here's a picture of the first seat of government, which is at Williamsburg. You can go there today, and it is a museum, and that's where they met in the Virginia House of Burgesses. Religion. Most of the guys here were Anglican. They were members of the Church of England. But in Maryland, which is north of Virginia, they were Catholic. There was a guy named Cecil Calvert, who later on changes his name to Lord Baltimore, who brings Catholics over to Maryland because they were also being persecuted by the king, by England. And like the Quakers, they believe very strongly in religious toleration. And so in Maryland, they actually made a law that it was called the Religious Toleration Act. And basically they said any religion in Maryland can practice freely. And it's illegal to persecute any of them. One last thing. In Georgia was a debtor colony at this time. It was the southern portion of the southern colonies. And it was also used as a protection zone because the Spanish were down there in Florida. So Georgia becomes kind of this place where people who owed money can come and try to pay off the debt. And a lot of times these guys, they were called indentured servants. They would come over and work on the plantations alongside slaves to try to pay off this debt. So that's basically it on the southern colonies. Make sure you watch the part 1 and part 2 of the entire 13 colonies so you kind of get a complete overview of what we are talking about here. I hope you enjoyed this 3-part series of the 13 colonies, and I will see you next time.